Imagine sitting alone in the quiet of the night, your heart heavy with worries, your mind restless with questions. In that moment, you come across something truly powerful. Asterisk asterisk Shura Rahman asterisk asterisk, the chapter of the Quran that speaks directly to the soul. As you listen, the words flow like a soothing river, filling the emptiness inside with peace. Each verse feels like an answer, a reminder, a call to reflect. Asterisk, which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? Asterisk, a question that echoes again and again, making you pause and think. But what makes Stura Raman so special? Why does it have such a deep impact on those who listen? Some say it brings healing. Others believe it holds secrets of gratitude, mercy, and divine wisdom. With its mesmerizing rhythm and powerful meaning, it's more than just words. It's an experience, a journey of the heart. Today, we're not just listening to this shura. We're diving into its meaning, uncovering its depth with Urdu translation and explanation. By the end of this video, you might see Shura Raman in a way you never have before. But before we get there, let's start with the very first verse and see where it takes us. The rain had started falling harder now, the rhythmic sound tapping against the windows like a warning. Sarah sat still at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Her mind replayed the conversation she'd had earlier with Ethan. He'd said something that hadn't quite settled right, something she couldn't shake. His words lingered, almost as if they were a riddle she wasn't meant to solve. "Ethan, do you trust me?" she had asked, her voice small and uncertain. He had looked at her, his eyes betraying nothing. But there was a pause, a hesitation that felt heavier than the silence that followed. Of course, he'd replied, but it didn't sound like the usual assurance he'd given her. It sounded like an answer designed to soothe, not reassure. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the growing sense that something was wrong. She had noticed the small things before, his late nights, his constant glances at his phone, the way his smile seemed more forced each day. But this was different. There was an edge to his presence now, something she couldn't explain, but she felt it like a pull in her chest. And then there was the letter. Sarah stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. She didn't know why she hadn't opened it sooner, but now it felt like the only thing that mattered. Sarah's fingers trembled as she tore open the envelope. The paper inside was old, yellowing at the edges, as though it had been tucked away for years. She unfolded it carefully, a sense of dread creeping up her spine with every movement. The handwriting was familiar, yet there was something unsettling about it, something wrong. It wasn't Ethan's, but it looked like it could be. "I know what you're hiding. Don't think I've forgotten asterisk." Her breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, heart pounding, trying to make sense of the words. Who could have sent this? And what did they mean? Hiding? Forgotten? The questions tumbled in on themselves, spinning in her head. She glanced up, as though the walls of the kitchen might suddenly hold some answer, but everything around her felt like it was closing in. She thought back to the days when she and Ethan had first moved in. Everything had felt so perfect, so simple. But now it was like a slow unraveling, each day revealing a new layer of something hidden beneath the surface. What was he really up to? And why had he been acting so strangely? Was he involved in something dangerous? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door creaking open. Ethan, he was home. The tension in her chest tightened, and instinctively, she shoved the letter into her pocket, as though the words had the power to betray her. He walked in, dripping wet from the rain, a look of exhaustion painted across his face. His gaze shifted toward her, pausing for a moment before he forced a smile. "Hey," he said, as if nothing was wrong. But she could see it in his eyes, the flicker of something she couldn't quite place. "Where were you?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed her. He shrugged, dropping his bag by the door. "Just out. You know, work stuff." He didn't meet her eyes. But she knew better now. There was no work stuff. Not anymore. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. She could feel her pulse quicken, the weight of the letter heavy in her pocket. What was he hiding? What was he not telling her? And then, as if on cue, the phone rang. Ethan glanced at it, his face tightening. He didn't move to answer. Sarah didn't miss it, the flash of panic, the way his hand hovered over the phone, but he didn't pick it up. Something was happening, and she was beginning to wonder if she had been blind to it all along. As he turned to walk toward the living room, she followed him, her footsteps quiet but determined. She couldn't let this go, not now. She needed to know what he was really up to. The tension in the room was palpable, and every word, every glance between them felt like a fragile thread holding them together. But for how long? She felt the pull again, the need to confront him, to demand answers. But there was something inside her, something she couldn't quite explain, that told her not to push too hard, too fast. The truth was dangerous, and she could feel it in her bones. In that moment, Sarah realized the quiet menace wasn't just coming from Ethan. It was all around her. Something had been brewing beneath the surface for a long time, and it wasn't just about him anymore. Something was closing in on them both, and she wasn't sure they could outrun it. The rain had intensified, the sound of it battering against the windows like a drumbeat to the tension building inside the house. Sarah stood at the edge of the living room, watching Ethan from the doorway. He was pacing, his hand running through his damp hair, his eyes darting to the phone on the coffee table. It had stopped ringing, but the silence felt even louder. She felt a surge of frustration. She wanted to ask him, confront him. She wanted to know why he wasn't being honest with her. But every time she opened her mouth, the words got caught in her throat, as though something inside her was warning her to wait. To be careful. She glanced down at the letter again, the ache still haunting her. Asterisky, know what you're hiding, asterisk, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a letter. It was a threat. "What's going on, Ethan?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. He froze, his back to her. There was a long pause before he spoke, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. "Nothing. Just drop it, Sarah." But she couldn't. Not anymore. "You're lying," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "You've been acting strange for weeks. And now, this." She pulled the letter from her pocket, holding it out between them. Ethan's face went pale, the color draining from his features. His eyes flickered to the letter, then back to her. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in a storm, unsure of which direction to run. I don't know what you think you know," he stammered, his voice wavering. "But this has nothing to do with you. Just forget it. It's not your problem." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She had never heard him like this before. He was always the calm one, the reassuring one. But now it was as if everything about him was slipping away, piece by piece. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, stepping closer. "I'm not going to let you keep hiding whatever this is." The room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. The air was thick, suffocating. She could feel the weight of the secret pressing down on her. There was something he wasn't telling her, something that was more than just a simple lie. Suddenly, the phone rang again. This time, Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached for it quickly, almost frantically, as if he was afraid it might stop before he could answer. He looked at the screen, his face tightening, then glanced back at Sarah. "Don't answer it," she demanded, but her voice felt small in the face of his growing panic. But Ethan didn't respond. He simply walked past her, his hand shaking as he picked up the phone. "Hello," he said, his voice a low whisper, barely audible. Sarah stood frozen, her heart thudding in her chest. Who was on the other end? What had Ethan gotten himself involved in? The fear gnawed at her, and for a brief moment, she thought she might actually suffocate from it. Ethan's words grew softer, more urgent, and Sarah couldn't make them out. She took a step forward, desperate for any clue, any hint of the truth. "Ethan," she called out, her voice trembling. He didn't turn around. His attention was fixed on the phone, his jaw clenched tight. Then out of nowhere, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Both of them jumped, the sudden noise shattering the fragile silence. Ethan hung up the phone immediately, his eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice harsh, almost panicked. Before Sarah could respond, he bolted toward the back door, his footsteps quick and deliberate. Her breath caught in her throat. What was going on? Who was in the house? Torn between following him and staying put, Sarah hesitated, then made up her mind. She wasn't going to be left in the dark anymore. She rushed after him, her heart pounding louder with each step. As she reached the back door, she stopped dead in her tracks. The shadows were long in the hallway. She could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps, but when she looked closer, there was no one there. Ethan had disappeared, and the silence that followed felt like a warning. Sarah's heart raced as she stepped into the hallway, the silence hanging heavy in the air. She called out Ethan's name, her voice strained, but there was no answer. The house seemed empty, the only sound the soft, relentless tap of rain against the windows. The back door was wide open, the storm spilling in, but Ethan was nowhere to be seen. She took a cautious step forward, her hand shaking as she reached for the light switch. The darkness felt suffocating now, the shadows stretching unnaturally long in the dim light. Something wasn't right. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a knot tightening with every passing second. She had to find him, no matter what. As she moved deeper into the house, her mind raced. Where had he gone? Why had he run? The phone call, the crash, everything seemed connected, but the pieces wouldn't fit. A cold chill swept through the room, and Sarah shuddered, her breath coming out in uneven bursts. Suddenly, she froze. There at the far end of the hallway, something gleamed faintly in the dim light, a reflection just barely visible. It was a mirror. But as her gaze fixed on it, her blood ran cold. The reflection wasn't just hers. Standing behind her, barely out of view, was a figure. She could make out the outline of a person, but their features were obscured by the dark. Her pulse surged, fear flooding her senses, but before she could react, the figure stepped forward. Looking for someone, the voice was low, smooth, and unfamiliar. Sarah spun around, heart leaping into her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was a man she didn't recognize. His clothes were soaked, his face shadowed by the hood of his jacket. But what struck her most were his eyes. They were cold, calculating, and somehow familiar. Her mind raced. Asterisk, where have I seen him before asterisk? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Who are you? She managed to croak, her voice barely a whisper. The man smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that sent a shiver down her spine. I'm someone who knows what Ethan's been hiding, he said, his gaze flickering to the open back door. Sarah's stomach churned. Ethan. She had to find him, but now this stranger was in the way. Before she could respond, the man took a step closer, his expression darkening. You shouldn't have gotten involved, Sarah. You're not ready to know the truth. Her breath caught in her chest as the weight of his words hit her. Asterisk not ready, asterisk what truth? Was Ethan mixed up in something dangerous? The man's presence, his words, they felt like the beginning of something much worse than she had imagined. As he took another step forward, she instinctively backed away, her mind racing for an escape plan. But there was nowhere to go, not now. The hallway stretched on behind her, and the walls felt like they were closing in. The man stopped just inches away from her, his gaze fixed on her with a kind of cold indifference. You think you can stop this? You think you can stop asterisk him asterisk? He paused, his lips curling into a knowing smile. Ethan's already made his choice, and so have you. Sarah's thoughts raced. Asterisk made his choice. Asterisk, what was he talking about? Was Ethan involved in something dangerous, something beyond her understanding? Her mind flashed back to the letter, the strange phone calls, the way Ethan had changed so suddenly. Was this all part of something bigger? Her heart pounded in her chest. She had to know. Before she could ask another question, the man turned and walked toward the door, his back to her. "I'll give you one chance," he said over his shoulder. "Leave. Walk away from all of this, while you still can." Sarah's legs felt weak, but she stood her ground. There was no turning back now. Ethan was in trouble. Asterisk, she asterisk was in trouble. And whatever this man was, whatever he knew, it wasn't going to stop her from finding out the truth. She didn't care what he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. The man chuckled darkly, his footsteps fading as he stepped into the storm. "Then you'll regret it," he called back, disappearing into the night. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Sarah standing in the dark, alone and more uncertain than ever. What had she just gotten herself into? And how far would she have to go to uncover the truth? Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more terrifying than the last. But one thing was clear now. Ethan's secret was far bigger, far darker than she could have ever imagined. And she was already too deep to turn back. Sarah stood in the dark hallway, her breath heavy in her chest, every nerve on high alert. The man was gone, but his words still echoed in her mind, like a warning she couldn't escape. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn deeper into something that wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about her too. She had no choice now.